Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on African Confessions. The following message that you'll be listening to, it comes from a message that I received on Facebook, and I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation. The message reads like this. Hello, how are you, Brother Nashi? I have a story that I want to share with you. I really don't even know where to start. The things that happened to me, even my whole family, they were quite shocked. Not the rest of my family, but some of my family members, they were quite shocked. This thing, Brother Nashi, it happened when I was still 16 years old. And this thing happened to me in the year 1998. Ever since I fell pregnant and I gave birth to a frog, I have never been able to give birth anymore. I missed my periods, Brother Nashi, when I was still in high school. The first time I just went on my periods, I was really embarrassed even to tell my mom. I went on my periods like any other normal girl who was starting her period at that time. The second month, when I went on my period, that is when one of my friends told me that I had to tell my mom. I was really embarrassed of telling my mom. At that time, my grandmother, suddenly, she had just traveled from the village. I don't know what she wanted in the city, but the previous night, before I had gone on my periods, I had a dream and I saw my grandmother. My grandmother was standing outside the room that I used to sleep in when I was staying with my parents. I don't know what she was telling me, but the only thing that I remember is that in my sleep, I was lying on a bed. It seemed like it was a hospital bed, but what I was doing in hospital, I don't even know. The only thing that I remember is that just before I woke up from that scary nightmare, I saw that my hands were filled with blood, and my grandmother, she had disappeared from my bedroom door. The next day, when I was coming from school, that is when I met my little brother. He was just playing in the streets, and he told me that grandmother had just arrived. And that is when I felt that there was blood that was coming out of my private parts. I had started my periods again. I was really ashamed, but I had no choice. I just sat on the sofa. Then I told my mom everything that was happening to me. I went indoors. Then I sat on the sofa and I spoke with my mom, and I was telling her everything that was going on with my body. My mom then went to her bedroom. When she came back, she had a brand new pack of sanitary pads. But my grandmother then said, "No, let me go and teach her. You cannot teach your own daughter when I am here. This is my responsibility." So my grandmother took me into that bedroom where I used to sleep when I was still staying with my parents. Then my grandmother took one of the sanitary pads. Then she told me how to wear that sanitary pad. My grandmother is the first person that saw my period blood. Before my grandmother left the room that we were in, she told me that when I have used that sanitary pad, I should not throw it. She told me that your first sanitary pad, after you have used it, it was supposed to be burnt. So I was supposed to give her so that she can burn that sanitary pad. At that time, I was just a young girl, and I never believed that there are things like witchcraft. I did as grandmother had told me. When I saw that I could not wear that sanitary pad any longer, because when I was still a young woman, I used to do that heavy bleeding, I then told my grandmother that I needed to change that sanitary pad. She then told me that after I have removed the sanitary pad, I had to look for another place. Then she was going to take that sanitary pad and burn it. But I never saw my grandmother burning that sanitary pad. I don't know if she went with it to the village or what. I never thought of telling my own mother what my grandmother had told me. So life continued. My grandmother returned back to the village, and I don't know if she returned back to the village with that sanitary pad. All that I know is that when I was 16 years old, I started dating this other guy. He was driving a taxi. Then that guy, he was way older than I was. He quickly got me pregnant. When I was dating that guy who was a taxi driver, I fell pregnant for him. And when I was 9 months pregnant, I was now staying with him because he was having problems with his other girlfriend. So he told me that he wanted me to become his wife because I was much more cooler than his other girlfriend. So Brother Nashi, what they do is that in our culture, if you are carrying your first pregnancy, when you are at around 7 months to 8 months pregnancy, your husband is supposed to return you back to your people so that they can take care of you until you have given birth. That is what that guy that I was staying with at that time did. When he saw that I was at around 7 months pregnant, he called his people. Then they went with me back to my people. They paid a little bit of lobola. Then they left me back in the village, the place where we were staying, because my mom and my father, they come from the same village. So where my father's house is back in the village, it is not far from where my mother's house is in the village. My mom then spoke with my grandmother. Then my grandmother said that it is better that I go and stay with her. My mom then agreed. So I went and I stayed with my grandmother. But from the very first night that I went and I stayed with grandmother, I never had peace, Brother Nashi. I was still a young woman, but I tried to pray. And whenever I would pray, I would see that there were people that will be in that room that I'll be sleeping in. Because in the village from where we come from, we used to have those mud houses. So usually at night, we never had any lighting because there was no electricity. But whenever I would start praying after having a nightmare, I would see that there will be people that will be walking out of that room that I'll be sleeping. What surprised me is that even though I was pregnant, but my grandmother, she only slept with me in her bedroom only once. Then the following evening, she started complaining. This was when we were sitting in the kitchen, and she told me that I am someone who is noisy. She told me that I snore a lot, and the previous night she could not comfortably sleep. She told me that I had to sleep in another room, and when I started sleeping in that room, I never had peace. So many nights I'll just sit and pray until the morning came. Things were really tough in the village, but what I used to do is that I would sleep throughout the day. Then when the evening would come, I would just sleep for a little while when people would be still walking around in the village. I really had a lot of nightmares. Brother Nashi, my pregnancy progressed until it was 9 months. And when it was 9 months, that is when my grandmother told me that she wanted to sleep with me in her bedroom. And when I started sleeping with my grandmother in her bedroom, all of those nightmares, they stopped. I started sleeping peacefully, but the only thing that concerned me, my brother, is that my baby was no longer playful as he was, because when I was still sleeping alone, sometimes I could not even fall asleep because the baby was so active. But from that very first day that my grandmother told me that I had to go back and sleep with her in her bedroom because she wanted to check on me, because now my pregnancy had progressed up until it was 9 months, there was peace in her bedroom. Then the day arrived that I went into labor. Back in the village from where I come from, the clinic is really far. You won't even think about going to the hospital because you will need to hire a car, because the village from where I come from, it's like in the remote areas. When my grandmother saw that my labor pains had started, she then told one of her grandsons to go around the village, because there were these elderly women that used to assist women who wanted to give birth, but they assisted them using the natural way. Those women came, and when those women came, brother, I saw that those women were not happy. And I noticed that their faces, they were not like normal faces. It's like they were angry at me, and I could not understand, and I wanted to cry. One of that elderly woman then slapped me on my face, and she said, "Don't you know that a woman who is in her labor, she is not allowed to cry, because if you cry, this baby is going to die in your womb. You have to be strong." But those women, they were really angry at me. I tried pushing, but there was nothing that was coming out. Then my grandmother, she went out. I don't know where she had gone. I think that she had gone into the nearby bushes so that she can dig up some herbs. Then she came back and she prepared those herbs for me so that I can drink. When I drank those herbs that my grandmother had prepared for me, I felt that in my stomach, the baby was gone. Even though my tummy was really big and it could show that this woman is pregnant, but inside, I felt like it was filled with air. There was nothing inside my tummy. Then those women started to tell me that I should push. So I pushed and I cried. I was experiencing a lot of pain. Then I felt that out of my private parts, there was something that came out of my private parts. But when I pushed that thing that came out of my private parts, I was expecting that it was going to be painful, because other women had told me that the moment that the head of the baby will come out of you, then you can't stop it, because the process now will be automatic. But that thing, it just came out of me and I didn't feel anything. When my grandmother and those women went quiet, I was really surprised. I thought that I had given birth to a stillborn baby, because the baby was not crying and no one even bothered to pick up the baby. So I tried to look, but one of those elderly women stopped me. My grandmother then went to her wardrobe. Then she took out this white garment. The white garment that she took, it was like 100% cotton. She then placed it on the bed and she started removing things from my private parts. It was really painful, and I don't even know what things she was removing from my private parts, but those things, they were really painful. They took that thing, then they wrapped it around that white cloth. Then my grandmother told me that I had to get out of the bed. When she told me that I had to get out of bed, I was crying because I kept on saying, "Where is my baby? Where is my baby?" Then she said, "Do not cry, because if you cry, you are going to wake up the things of the night." Things of the night, Brother Nashi. What did she mean? I was really scared to cry. Then my grandmother and those elderly women that had assisted me to give birth, they told me to follow them. When this thing happened, Brother Nashi, I think that it was somewhere around 2 a.m. or so, because I could hear the elephants walking towards the river, because my grandmother's house, it was close to this other river. So whenever we would hear the elephants walking towards the river, we would know that it was around 2 a.m. and when they would come back from the river, it would be at around 3 a.m. going to 4 a.m. That is the way that we used to calculate time back in our village. We didn't have electricity or anything. My grandmother and those women, they walked with me to the river. They said that they were looking for a place where it was always wet, but they wanted a place where it was wet even if it doesn't rain, where people would not quickly find that place. We looked on the banks of the river until one of the women said that she had found a perfect spot. My grandmother then told me to dig. She told me that I had to dig something that looked like a grave, but it was not really deep. I just dug up until to my ankles. Then my grandmother then handed me whatever she was holding. And that thing, my brother, it was still alive. I never thought that I would see a creature like that. She then opened that thing. That thing looked like a frog and it had a lot of legs. I think that by the time that my grandmother was removing whatever she was removing from my private parts, maybe she was removing all of those legs that were stuck on my private parts, and some of the legs were still stuck inside of my private parts. My grandmother opened that white garment and I saw that thing. When I wanted to scream, one of those elderly women quickly walked to the place where I was standing. Then she covered my mouth. She said, "Do not even let out a word, because you will awaken the things of the night." Then my grandmother told me that I had to place that thing that she had given me into that grave, but I had to do it with respect. After I had placed that frog inside that little grave, my grandmother then took out a rope. When I looked at that rope, it was a long rope. It had a lot of colors. My grandmother then tied that rope around my waist. Then the remainder of that rope, she placed it inside that little grave. My grandmother then told me that I had to start walking, and as I was walking, I was not supposed to look behind or to look at that grave. She told me that if I looked behind, then I would never be able to give birth in my life again. I did that, and as I was walking without looking back, my grandmother and those women, I heard that they were burying that frog inside that grave that I had dug. When I could not walk anymore, my grandmother came to the place where I was. Then she untied that rope and she walked back with that rope to that place where we had dug up that grave. She also buried that rope with that frog. Then we walked back home. I wanted to ask my grandmother what had happened. My grandmother told me that we were not allowed to discuss things of the night before the sun had risen up. She told me that I had to sleep. When you are in stress, when you are highly stressed, Brother Nashi, you would just sleep, because I just lay on the floor without any blanket or what. Then I just slept the pain away. Early in the next morning, my mom, I don't know how she had traveled from the city to the village, because there was no bus that traveled throughout the night. All of the buses, we knew that they would leave the city early in the morning, so that at around 6 p.m. it would have reached our village. When I woke up, I saw my mom. I didn't even have the strength to ask her how she had managed to travel to the village. My mom then spoke with me, but she never asked me anything about the baby. Later on, my grandmother then sat with me down. She gave me some herbs to drink. She then told me everything that had happened. She told me that there was a lot of witches in the village, and those witches had stolen my baby. My grandmother told me that it was really possible that those witches, when they had stolen the baby, they were going to make a tokoloshi out of my baby. When they had stolen my baby, they replaced the baby with that frog that I had given birth to. My grandmother told me that she was waiting for a traditional healer to come and to cleanse me. Otherwise, I will never be able to give birth in my life again. I waited. There was nothing else that I could do. I was in pain. I had just gone into labor, all of that labor pain. My breasts were really painful. They were waiting for a baby to get its first milk. It was really painful. And all of that labor pain, I had felt that labor pain for nothing. I had given birth to a frog. My grandmother then told me that when my husband would come, I should never tell him that I had given birth to a frog, otherwise he was going to dump me. When that man came, I told him that I had a stillborn baby. He cried because we had gone to this other place where he was told that I was carrying a baby boy, so he cried so much. When I returned back home with him, after the cleansing ceremony had been done, I experienced so much abuse from that man. In the end, I just decided that I had to get out of that marriage. Otherwise, that man, he wanted to kill me. There were so many nights when he would be angry at me, especially if he would be drunk. He would say that you ate my baby. The reason why you gave birth to a stillborn baby, it is because you ate my baby whilst it was still in your womb. Then you will start to beat me up. So I ended up running away. After that, Brother Nashi, I got into so many relationships, but I have failed to have a baby. This is my own story. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received on Facebook. Strange things do happen in this world. Please let us meet again in the following episode.